Good morning. I'm Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to Work Matters with Pastor Will, one of our newest educational programs here at Emmanuel. This morning we're going to look at Bishop Wayne Miller from Chicago. He was here in 2020 and he offered one of the most popular talks at church this year. His theme was living life well, how to live the integrated life. And so he wants to lay out how do we align faith and work. He'll even add in there economics. And he provides a model for how we can do that. That's the first session, and then the second builds off that model. It says, now, how can we integrate our lives based on this model? And he's going to offer the answer that the congregation is one of the most perfect places to model the model. And so now we want to invite Pastor Will to lead us in this very important discussion. Pastor Will?
Thanks again, Pastor Rick. Welcome back, everyone, to Work Matters with me, Pastor Will. And in this episode, it is the second part of a two-part series from Bishop Wayne Miller, the Bishop Emeritus of the Metropolitan Chicago Synod of the ELCA. In the first episode, Bishop Miller talked about living life well. How do we live life well? And he put forth a model to live that life well, to live that life in an integrated and intentional way. And he called that model the model of vocation. So in this next video, you're going to see Bishop Miller go through that model. How do we integrate this model into our everyday lives? It's a wonderful video. I cannot wait to share the tidbits from it at the end. So please be sure to watch the whole thing to the very end, because I think the best part is at the end. Take a look and I'll catch you back here on the other side.
But in this model, of course, because it's an integrated model, there are also dyads. So there's an overlapping circle between faith and work. There's an overlapping in the circles between work and economics, and there's an overlapping in the circles between economics and faith. Again, on the other side. So what goes in those spaces? And I would say that in the space between faith and work, we get morality. I'll be able to go into this a little more tomorrow when we have more time, but I'll just kind of give you a shorthand. Morality for me is a very distinctive thing. It's about my internalized sense of right and wrong. What do I believe in my heart of hearts is right and wrong? And how we live in relationship to what we believe. So if I am living a life that is consonant with what I believe is the way I should live my life, what I experience is that I am a moral person. If I am living a life that is in conflict with what I believe is right and wrong, then for me, doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, for me, I'm living an immoral life. And that is a problem for me that disintegrates me. I can't just compartmentalize and say I'm okay here and I'm not okay. I'm me wherever I am. The third option is amorality, which is that you have no internalized sense of right and wrong, and that actually is a psychopathology. Right? Morality becomes the way becomes connected to work in this sense, that work is also an externalization of what we believe. It's an externalization of who we are. It's who we are out there in the world. And so how we work, the way we work, where we work, all of those things have a moral component to them. They can either make us feel better about our life or worse about our life. And that becomes part of the integration challenge. Between work and economics, work in this sense, the way I'm using it, is an individual thing. It's the way I, as a moral actor, work in the world and accomplish things. And I'll spend more time on different ways to think about work. But work with others is the way we coordinate in order to make an economy. So when my work is integrated with your work, is integrated with your work, is integrated with your work, we come up with something that looks like an economy. And in order to make that work, we need something that is broadly called governance. Now, I'm not talking about government, because I'm guessing that there are lots of attitudes here about government. But in my sense of the word governance, what I'm saying is a rule book. You cannot play a good game of soccer if some of the people are playing baseball rules and some of the people are playing basketball rules and some of the people are playing American football rules, right? You have to have a stipulated set of principles or ideas or whatever that you're going to hold yourself accountable to in order to be in the game. And if you do not have at some form of governance, it can be light, it can be heavy, it can come from here, it can come from there, but if there isn't some sort of rule book that the people in the game agree to, you get something that is it's not just competitive, it's chaotic. It becomes quickly so adversarial that it's very difficult to organize it into an economy. So we have to have some kind of governance structure. The structure that stands between economics and faith in my model is what I would call social ethics. Now, in some circles, particularly in the ELCA, this would be called justice. I tend to stay away from, I don't mind conversation about justice, but I have a problem sort of standardizing it because I don't think that there's a standard understanding of what justice is. Justice is one. I had a synod justice committee when I first started as bishop. Big room full of people. There were like 20 people here. And I started out my meeting with them. I said I would like everybody on a sheet of paper in 1 or 2 sentences to give me a definition of justice. And I had 22 definitions. Right? Some people think everybody gets what they deserve. Somebody what they get what they earn. Some people think justice is everybody gets the same. Somebody thinks that justice is about the redistribution of power. Some people think it's about the redistribution of material wealth. Some people think justice is, does justice mean we all start in the same place but end where we end? Or does it mean that everybody ends with the same number of toys at the end of the day? And what a lawyer means by justice is really, there are probably some lawyers in here too, what the law, I'll put it this way, what the law means by justice is not the same as what the prophet Amos means by justice. So justice is not a very helpful word to me, even though it's common. We have to spend more time with it. But social ethics, this gets into the relationship between morality and ethics. And for me, even though those words are often used interchangeably, I think there's an important distinction between them. Morality is how am I behaving with respect to what I understand to be right and wrong. Ethics is how I'm behaving with respect to how my community defines right and wrong. It's a social concept. Right? So what that means, what that allows for the possibility of being moral but unethical. That's what a whistleblower is. A whistleblower is someone who operates out of their own sense of right and wrong, and therefore they're behaving morally, but they're behaving in a way that's way out of line with the ethics of the community that they're blowing the whistle. They're seen as disloyal, as disruptive, as troublemakers, as blah, 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 blah. Why? Because they've stepped outside of the ethical framework of the community that they're blowing the whistle. By the same token, it's possible for a person to simply put up and shut up and conform with the ethics of the community that they're in, but be immoral. Because even though externally they're just following the rules, I'm just following orders, inside they know it's wrong, and they're doing it anyway. So they're being completely ethical and completely immoral at the same time. I think that social ethics is actually the place where this model, it breaks down in lots of places in here, but I think this is the place where it's really noticeable, where the model is breaking down in our social experience. Why? Because social ethics apply to our economic life, call our economy to account to the principles and values of a faith perspective. It doesn't have to be a Christian faith perspective or a Jewish faith, but there's some, when I say it's a faith perspective, it's faith in something beyond yourself. It's faith in something beyond your own ego. It's faith in something beyond, frankly, your own self-interest. And that faith in something beyond is what this makes us accountable to. And we can't find it because of the fragmentation. We can't find that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to. And that becomes a problem now for the whole system, because when the economy is not accountable to anything, then it starts to go off the rails in terms of what? In terms of this question, the outside circle. Because where it tends to go off the rails is that we can be prosperous, we can be abundant, but if we're not somehow holding ourselves and each other accountable, then it's not a vocation in the sense of loving and serving our neighbor. Because we're not putting anything back into the community in order to make it a good community for everybody who lives in it. I think, personally, I believe that the church is, or religious communities, because it really does go beyond the church. You know, I spent 2 years as president of the Council of Religious Leaders in metropolitan Chicago, which was a wonderful experience. I mean, Cardinal Cupich actually invited me to preach at Holy Name Cathedral on the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. That doesn't happen to every Lutheran. In fact, if anybody had told me, I said this in my sermon, I said, if anybody had told me that on the 500th anniversary of the Reformation I was going to be here, that probably would not have come to my mind. The Council of Religious Leaders is an A to Z table. It goes from Anglicans to Zoroastrians and everything in between. And what you find when you work in a broadly interfaith environment like that is that there are faith values that are not specific to one particular ideology, one specific theological perspective, that actually are there is still there some commonality about decency, about right and wrong, about civil discourse. I mean, that's really what you're doing with the civil discourse, the 5 principles of civil discourse, right? Seven, sorry. Yeah, so you're setting up a boundary of governance on the operation of this particular community. And I think that one of the things that we can think about with all this, and then I'll sort of end here because we're going to go into much more depth on these things for those of you who can make it tomorrow, and I hope some of you will. There is a really an important way in which I think that the churches, congregations, can start to imagine themselves. We talk about congregations as communities, and that's true. I think we can start to talk about congregations as economies. And what does it look like? How does it change your frame of mind if you start to think about your congregation as a local economy? In terms of the faith values, in terms of how people are finding access to work within the community and beyond the community. What is the economy that you create here, and what are you going to hold that economy accountable to? And what happens is that for the people who participate, years after year in the life of an economy like this one, it forms you. And it becomes part of your morality that you're taking out into the world. So it starts out as a social ethic, like the 7 principles. That gets internalized. That's why it's important to repeat them every week, right? Because you're internalizing them. Now when you see those 7 principles, for those of you that have been here for weeks and weeks or months and months or years and years, it's like, oh yeah, that stuff. It's self-evident because you've internalized it. Now it's not just an ethic that you've agreed on, it's the morality of the people who are in here. And you are going to take that morality as your center and you're going to carry it out into the world. And it's going to have an impact on all the different arenas of work that you engage in. Employment, friendships, neighborhoods, political life, all of it, family, all of that becomes part of it. So I think we'll stop it there.
Thank you. This, it's like a lot of grist for the mill. But before we let you go, and again, I hope you can join us tomorrow, but speak to one of either two things.
Yeah.
What if I'm sitting here, I go, well, I'm retired. None of this applies to me.
Me too.
So how do you apply this to yourself now, having just gone through that? Either that one, or I was taught the economy is driven by me following my own self-interest.
Right.
Right? And if I follow my own self-interest, somehow that all gets worked out in the wash.
Right. So it's probably reassure some of you, I am a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. And the self-interest piece is a huge part of it. But I think that for me, to work at its best, I think it requires us to work in short-term and long-term frames. So what is if I'm hungry and I'm going to be hungry for the next 2 weeks, and I've got 12 sandwiches in the refrigerator, right? My self-interest on one level is to eat until I'm full. My self-interest in the long term is eat one sandwich every day and you'll be better at the end of 2 weeks, right? So it does require, I think, to make this work, I also think that it requires seeing self-interest. This may be controversial, and we may need to talk more about this. I think it also requires us to be able to step up and to break through the illusion of self-sufficiency. No one is self-sufficient. No one. Some people are more independent. Some people are more autonomous. Some people have the luxury of being able to make more choices between this and that for their life, all of that. But there's no one, if you're working in an economy, there's no one who is truly self-sufficient. I mean, when I was a buyer for National Can, you better believe that even though I was competing and transacting with my suppliers, I needed them. And I protected my suppliers from the people on my team because it was our self-interest to pay attention to their self-interest. So I do think that that's part of it. And then just briefly on the question of retirement, I think that the other thing that, I mentioned this in passing, but I think it's really important to emphasize it. Vocation is not just in the realm of commerce. Vocation happens in multiple arenas simultaneously. I have a vocation now, since I have left my vocation as a synod bishop, I have been drawn much more deeply into my vocation as a husband and a father. Not that I wasn't before, but I've got focus now. My vocation as a son. My mother is 95 years old. She lives in a nursing home. I spend a lot of time with my mom now that I didn't have time to spend with her when I was working. As a bishop particularly, I was all over the place. So there are constantly through our lives, our vocation is not one thing. Vocation is a function of time and timing as much as anything else. And I think that to honor that, to listen to it, to make sure that, and part of the way we listen to it is in community. When we have conversations in community, you hear yourself say things and you hear other people say things, you say, never thought about that before. My understanding of work, for example, which I'll get into tomorrow, has really opened because of something you said when I was making a presentation up at the LECNA leadership thing. You said something about work that was outside of the frame of what I was thinking, how I was thinking about work. And it's changed my whole way of thinking about what work is and what it isn't. So the community interaction is also a big part of how we do.
Let's thank you again.
Wow. Were you able to wrap your head around the model for vocation that Bishop Miller presented to us all? How about those little parts where the dyads crossed that Bishop Miller was talking about. Between faith and work, there was morality. Between work and economics, governance, the rule book. And between faith and economics, the social ethics of it all. And that last part really got hold for me, because it actually, Bishop Miller helped us walk through the whole process. So when we create value in our community, like when we create the value of our faith here at church, and start to integrate it together as a group in community and actually live it out, as Bishop Miller was saying, be intentional about it, it starts to work on us. The Spirit starts to work on us in such a way that it becomes a part of our morals, our internal compass. And in my opinion, if we have enough of people doing that and enough communities of people doing that, well, then it goes down to the next dyad that talks about governance, not government, the rule book, as he was talking about. Then the rules for order in our society begin to change, and we can start to begin to see some real things happening in our world. Finally, I want to leave you with this concept that Bishop Miller's talking about, seeing the congregation not just as a community, but as an economy. And this has a special place in my heart as the mission developer of Emmanuel Community Park, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to get our people and the people out in the Golden Gate Estates area to look at our congregation and to look at our park as an economy, a place that has value, where you can learn the values of your faith and how to integrate them into your work, and then how to take that together as a group to really develop systems of change that can have a lasting impact for us all. But again, as Bishop Miller said, an integrated life requires us to be intentional. So we need your help to make this possible. Let's have this conversation. Let's continue talking about congregations as economies, working together, integrating our faith in our work and our economics, and being intentional, walking with, praying with the Spirit every step of the way as God continues to guide us towards God's truth. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for watching this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube page. Follow us on Facebook. Keep posted on the internet, naplesemmanuel.org, and we will see you next week here at Work Matters with Pastor Will. Take care. God bless.